I'm Dan Snow, and to time with the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings, I'm going to be looking at some of the best and most memorable depictions of the day in film and TV. The D-Day landings, codenamed Operation Overlord, was the Allied invasion of Europe on June the 6th, 1944. It took years to prepare for. It was the largest amphibious assault in military history. Around 4,500 Allied soldiers died on that one day, but the invasion was a success. It was the springboard for liberating France and taking the war to Germany and toppling the Nazis the following year. This is a deep dive into D-Day movies. Well, the first movie I want to check out is, well, it's almost certainly the most memorable depiction of D-Day in any movie. In fact, I think it's probably the most memorable depiction of warfare across any movie or TV show. It's Saving Private Ryan, the absolutely epic Steven Spielberg 1998 movie. It won 5 Oscars. Weird thing about Saving Private Ryan, it didn't actually win Best Picture. It was beaten by Shakespeare in Love. But it is an iconic movie. I think it changed movie theatre. It changed the cinema experience as we understand it. And the characters are fictional, the plot is fictional, but the opening scene is generally regarded as pretty accurate. Where they went to enormous trouble to create what it must have looked like and felt like on Omaha Beach, which was the bloodiest of the 5 beaches which were assaulted by Allied troops on D-Day. This scene for me just encapsulates the sheer horror of what it must have been like going ashore. It's, at the first, what I like is there's a calm before the storm. You see them going in these landing craft, heavily laden down. That people are being sick. A lot of the troops were sick on D-Day. It was a lot rougher than people were expecting. And then suddenly, that ramp goes down at the front and German machine gun fire rakes through that unit. Now, there are units on Omaha in particular that would have suffered casualties like this. There are units that were almost wiped out on Omaha in particular. And the other thing you see here, which is pretty accurate, is a lot of those landing craft, they ended up in the wrong place. There was a lot more drift along the coast than people had allowed for in the planning. And they ended up hitting sandbanks, sandbars, obstacles. The crew would let down the ramp at the front thinking they're on the beach, and the men would jump out into deep water. Some would drown. They'd been weighed down by their kit. You get a sense of struggling ashore here. You see a lot of the German defence here, a lot of the German beach obstacles. There's these 3 steel girders welded together. They're called hedgehogs. You can see the wooden posts, that wooden ramps with mines on top. So when a landing craft came here, they might trigger those mines, blow a hole in the side of the boat or the ship. It's the hardest thing in warfare to make an opposed beach landing. You've got to deal with the sea, you've got to deal with the weather, you've got to deal with the difficulty of getting ashore. And the enemy are entrenched, they've got bunkers and barbed wire. In the case of Omaha, which we see here, the enemy have got the advantage of significant height. It's quite a hilly place, Omaha. There are cliffs and bluffs looking down. And as you see, the Germans are able to look right down on the beach. You'd have had to fire shorter bursts on that machine gun, the MG42. It's an air-cooled machine gun. And if you fired that quickly, the whole barrel would melt. But these things are small quibbles. I've read one account from a guy driving a vehicle up the beach on Omaha. He managed to get the vehicle ashore from a landing craft. But he couldn't maneuver on the beach because there were so many dead and wounded men lying around on the beach. He felt he'd be crushing his own wounded comrades. He didn't feel he could do that. So it was a bulldozer, in fact. It just stayed static on the beach and other men hid behind it, desperately cowering behind anything that could give some shelter from the vicious fire that was coming in from the bluffs above, the defences above. It's a harrowing depiction of warfare here, and at the time it was even more harrowing. We hadn't seen movie-making special effects like this in the late 90s. You see men losing limbs, you see men blown into the air, a flamethrower operator explodes. It's very troubling indeed. And in fact, when this movie came out, it was very triggering for a lot of World War II veterans. They had to set up helplines so people that had been there could actually call in and talk to a therapist. Remember, this is only 50, 55 years after the landings themselves, so there's a lot of guys still alive, they'd be in their 70s, who would have experienced these beach landings and other landings like them. What I like about this astonishing scene is you really get a sense of what made the difference on Omaha. It wasn't, the plan went out the window. The tanks didn't arrive, and Tom Hanks actually talks about the swimming tanks, most of them foundered in the choppy seas, they sank to the bottom, and sadly they're still there to this day. And what it came down to on Omaha were just small units, lieutenants, captains, sergeants, relatively junior ranks, making key decisions, leading just small groups of men forward, sniffing out weak points in enemy defences, and slowly just chipping away and working their way through that German defensive system. And you get a great sense of that here. You see Tom Hanks as a captain, he's leading his men, he's looking for opportunities, and eventually they just find a bit of cover, they find that seawall, they're able to regroup, they're able to use the so-called Bangalore torpedo that's a long explosive device that will blast holes in barbed wire. And by small groups of highly motivated, skilled and prepared men like this, they're able to get into and through the German defences.
Fire in the hole!
And Omaha, through the morning on Omaha, despite appalling casualties, groups of men are able to get onto those bluffs, onto those cliffs, and eventually up to the cliff tops a couple of hours after landing. You see the powerful German defences here, the concrete pillboxes, the barbed wire, the trench lines. But what this shows as well is that when you manage to infiltrate around and behind those defences, they're quite vulnerable. It was a strong defensive line, but it was a brittle one. And once you punch through it, you can come round behind, and the Germans are in big trouble because these defensive positions aren't really designed to be defended from around the back and the sides. So it's easier to kill, to neutralise, to capture the German defenders when you've infiltrated around the flanks.
Sugar Cane, Sugar Charlie 3, say again, Dog 1 is open. Send in the dozer, I'm waiting here to tie in my flanks, open.
What?
What?
I'm sorry, I can't understand what you're saying.
This shows quite realistically the Americans taking no prisoners. Talking to veterans, I have been told that there are certain situations in which it's quite difficult for the other side to surrender. If it's very close quarters fighting, it's very, very amped up like it is here, then it is quite hard to sort of slow down and allow surrenders to take place because the men are just so pumped. You don't want to take any chances. So if you're a machine gun operator, if you've just given someone a belt of machine gun rounds at point blank range, it's going to be quite hard for you then to put your hands up and go, oh, by the way, I surrender.
That's quite a view.
Yes, it is. Quite a view.
And we see the corpse with Ryan marked on his kit. Now, in Saving Private Ryan, the Ryan family are made up, but it's based on the true story of the Nyland family. Two of them were killed on and around D-Day. Another one was killed in Southeast Asia. And a final family member was brought home and protected so as not to cause even more trauma to the family. Saving Private Ryan is certainly one of the most extraordinary war movies ever made. At the time it was first released, I don't think any of us had seen special effects. We'd never seen war like that on our screens. It takes on, that first scene that takes on Omaha is iconic. It's completely extraordinary. And I've talked to many veterans on the beach of Normandy, and I've said to them, what was it like? And they say, just go and watch Saving Private Ryan. Next up, I want to have a look at Band of Brothers. It was created a couple of years after Saving Private Ryan, 2001, by the Spielberg Tom Hanks dream team, following their collaboration on Saving Private Ryan. It's based on a non-fiction book by the historian, the writer, Stephen Ambrose. Now, the Band of Brothers is a Shakespearean expression, but it refers to this small unit who saw a huge amount of action in the Second World War, 1944-45. They're Easy Company of the 2nd Battalion, the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. Now, they're the Screaming Eagles. They're one of the most famous, iconic airborne divisions in the history of warfare. And it just turns out this company, they're very well led, very high caliber, excellent training, and their experience meant that they just happened to be in several key pinch points of the campaign to liberate Northwest Europe.
The estuary of the Douve River divides two beachheads, codenamed Utah here and Omaha here. Seaborne infantry will hit these beaches in force at a date and time to be specified. H-hour, D-Day. Airborne's objective, gentlemen, is to take the town of Carentan, thus linking Utah and Omaha into a single continuous beachhead.
Omaha and Utah into one continuous beachhead. Each trooper will learn this operation by heart and know his and every other outfit's mission to the detail.
Lieutenant Meehan?
Yes, Dukeman.
Sir, are we dropping tonight?
When it's time for you to know, we'll let you know. In the meantime, study these sand tables, maps, and reconnaissance photos until you can draw a map of the area by memory. Now, we will drop behind this Atlantic wall 5 hours before the 4th Infantry lands at Utah. Now, between our assembly area and the battalion's objective, there is a German garrison right here in this area, Saint-Marie-de-Mont. Easy Company will destroy that garrison.
And in this opening scene, we get a pretty good history lesson on what was going to happen on D-Day. You get a description of the 5 beaches over which the Allies were hoping to land, a discussion of German defences, artillery, machine gun nests, rifle pits, that the Allies were going to be meeting as they tried to storm up those beaches. So the paratroopers were going to land a few hours before the beach landings. They were going to roam around the countryside and try and clear the way for those beach landings to take place. We then see them in the C-47 transport aircraft. It's called a Skytrain in the American military. They are flying in low, there's lots of turbulence, and there's lots of anti-aircraft fire, which is just rocking those planes. Those aircraft, they had to have a lot of guts, those pilots. You're flying low and straight. You've got to drop the airborne troops exactly where they're supposed to be dropped. You can't swerve, you can't take diversionary action. Otherwise, the sticks of paratroopers will end up all over the countryside. There's a harrowing scene in the aircraft. They're taking fire, and I've talked to veterans who say part of them wanted to get out of the aircraft. They felt it was drawing enemy fire, but they knew that once they jumped out, it'd be out of the frying pan into the fire. So you're in two minds whether you wanted to be in that plane or be in the air floating down to the ground. As the signal came, they stand up on the aircraft, they clip into a wire, and they jump out the side of that aircraft. There's a static line that automatically opens the parachute. Down you go, you're heavily laden, you've got ammunition, you've got food, you've got all your kit, and then you hit the ground. It's pretty unnerving to be a paratrooper because you know you're landing behind enemy lines. You are by definition surrounded. You're by definition outnumbered. You'll be thrown out the back of an aircraft. You might be separated from the rest of your unit. The parachutes are going to glide down in different places. You're going to land in enemy territory and you might be completely by yourself. And it's the middle of the night.
Who's that? Lieutenant Winters? Is that you? Any weapon? No, sir.
And the key thing then is then coalescing on the ground, working out where you are, hoping you've been dropped where you thought you were going to be dropped because you've been through the maps, you've been through training over and over again, and then you try and meet up with your comrades as they've done here. They've found enough of them. They've concentrated together, they've got enough of them to try and carry out some of their tasks. They've got to work out where they are, they've got to work out where, in this case, a German artillery, big gun basically, where that might be, because they want to neutralise that gun before the troops start landing on the beach.
We're about 7 kilometers away from our objective. Almost 4 hours away from when we need to have it secured. So, we got a lot of walking ahead of us. You men will stick with us until we find your unit. Let's go.
Hey, Harry. Carry on. Oh, easy company.
It's good to see you, Dick.
Yeah, you too, Buck. What's the situation?
Not good. 90% of the men are still unaccounted for.
Lieutenant Meade?
No one's seen him, or anyone from this plane. You know, if he is missing, wouldn't that put you in line to be the next commander of Easy?
It's an important moment. We hear the commanding officers missing in action, as so many people were. It later turns out he was actually killed. And so Lieutenant Richard Winters is asked to take command of Easy Company's assault. And that's the beginning of an extraordinary command career for him.
We're heading to the right about, what, 300 yards? Up through those gardens. Now, they're right between us and causeway number 2. Firing onto the boys landing at Utah. Think Easy can handle it?
Yes, sir.
My guess is they're doing some terrible damage there.
This shows the extraordinary detail that went into the planning for D-Day. There are small units of men who have specific jobs to attack individual German positions. This is what they're discussing here. And it's a reminder that D-Day was this gigantic operation, but it was made up, it was the sum of these tiny, tiny parts which collectively delivered the huge success of D-Day.
Let's move!
What these paratroopers do, you see them recceing here. They can't just go in guns blazing. They're working out what's happening. They're working out. They're checking whether the intelligence they've received before they jumped is actually correct. Inevitably, things will have changed. Things will be different. So they're conducting a reconnoiter, and then they go in.
Come on.
This is an astonishing example of this kind of small unit action, and it's still studied. It's still studied in military academies. But it's called the Breakour Manor Assault, and it's a classic example of a small unit assault on a fixed position. I was actually, I've been on an archaeological dig at Breakour Manor, but sadly we didn't find anything at all. It's an example of just very highly trained, well-prepared, elite soldiers moving in and taking an enemy position and neutralising the troops they find there. Some of the men putting down covering fire, others moving fast. So speed, aggression, fire, all of these things are really important. The men have got rifles, they've got some machine guns.
Grenade! Toy! Let's go! Get out of there! Get out of there!
You see one here accidentally dropping a grenade, and that shows just how dangerous the battlefield was. It's bad enough the enemy trying to kill you, but it's very easy to hurt yourself with your own weapons and those of your comrades.
Here's the second gun. Grenades first, then keep going. Go!
Right.
Something right. Look! God, I'm so confused. They're firing on the third gun.
We better blow this thing before they figure out what the hell's happening.
I'm gonna go and see what's keeping them lifted. All right.
You see the Germans firing at each other here. This is interesting because battles are inherently confusing. There's lots of noise. You sometimes can't see where the smokeless cartridges people are using. You can't see where the fire's coming from. It's often the case that in confusion of battle you can end up sustaining friendly fire casualties, blue on blue casualties.
I don't have any way to set it off, sir!
You see them using the Germans' own grenades here, the famous stick grenades, to destroy the German artillery pieces. Just stick a grenade right down the barrel, and that will do enough damage to make sure the artillery piece can't be used. These are heavy guns. These have the ability to rain down fire, shrapnel, high explosives on the beaches. It was vital to take out these guns if the beach landings were to have a chance of success.
Running a little low on ammo, sir! How about you, Malarkey? Okay! Think you got enough to take the third gun? We'll soon find out, Dick. Malarkey, let's go! Toy, cover! Okay, fire in the hole!
This is one of the great scenes, I think, in television history. They've gone to enormous lengths to make sure it's pretty accurate. They've put the cast through the kind of training, the tactical training that these men would have gone through. The sound design, the weapons are accurate. They fired World War II weapons to create an accurate soundscape. And it shows the importance of small units of well-trained, well-led men, each playing their part on D-Day. And it's the sum total of all of those small actions that meant that D-Day was a success, and the Allies suffered less casualties than they'd feared when they hit those beaches.
Okay, back to battalion! Go! Go!
Masters of the Air is a very recent, it's a very good depiction of the experiences of a group of bombers and aircrew through the Second World War. I'm glad to say it does cover D-Day briefly, and it's a really valuable contribution to how D-Day is portrayed on film and TV. It really adds to our dramatic picture of D-Day. It's really important to remember that D-Day wasn't just a naval operation, even though 7,000 ships and boats, biggest flotilla of all time, biggest naval operation of all time. It wasn't just an astonishing ground assault as those soldiers charged up the beach and into the fields beyond. It's also a hugely important moment in aviation history. The skies above were absolutely filled with aircraft. It was the biggest day of aviation activity of the war to that point. In fact, in human history to that point. Over 10,000 sorties of bombers, of interceptors, of fighter bombers. And you do get a sense in Master of the Air of the massive amounts of planning that go into that. And it's based on a book by Donald Miller. It follows the 100th Bomber Group. They flew flying fortresses. Now, B-17 flying fortresses were flying during the day at this stage. The RAF, the British RAF, with their Lancaster bombers, their heavy bombers, flew at night. The Americans were trying to fly during the day. They were taking terrible casualties in doing so, but they thought it increased their likelihood of actually hitting their intended targets.
(5:56 to 5:57 a.m. on June 3rd, 1944. 3 days to D-Day. The last minute of sleep I'll get for 72 hours. Our job was to bomb the German defenses in Normandy only minutes before the landing craft hit the beaches, and then spend the day hitting German bridges, railroads, and communication lines further inland. About 200 missions in total, all needing flight plans and maps.
We see one of the main characters here is a navigator called Harry Crosby, and he's preparing for D-Day by plotting all the different bombing routes that the B-17s would take. They're pretty heavy bombers. They're focused on destroying the railroads, the bridges. What they wanted to do was stop the Germans rushing reinforcements to those D-Day beaches. And this is one of the most successful bomber offensives of the war, was just smashing this infrastructure in France.
You need to sleep, Crosby.
Yeah. When the mission's over.
The planners don't tend to be the ones who we remember. They don't tend to be the ones who we celebrate their heroism. They didn't necessarily charge up the beach and take German positions at bayonet point. But without that planning, without that gigantic, meticulous preparation, D-Day wouldn't have been possible.
Just as I'd finished mapping the route for one mission, operations handed down 5 more. All high priority targets. The lack of sleep, the coffee, the uppers, the stress, the fear, the disconnect. That's a drug in itself.
He stays up, we see him staying up 3 straight days to plot the routes, and he actually has to abuse medication to keep awake. This is not unrealistic. I've talked to people who would take primitive amphetamines and things to stay awake, to boost their awareness of the military situation. It just shows the hard work, the dedication, the sacrifice that even the planners put in as they're preparing for one of the, the largest amphibious invasion in military history to that point.
You have to go to sleep.
No, I'm fine. I just gotta, the briefing.
Go to bed, Cross. That's an order. Now.
I can't do it, Jack.
Crosby!
I'm fine. Truly, just a couple more things I gotta get going. I was wondering if you'd ever wake up. What time is it? 7:30. 7:30. Shit, there's still time. There's still time! Come on, goddammit! 7:30 Saturday morning, Cross. Huh? You've been out of it for 3 days.
Having done all the planning, he passes out, he's exhausted, he comes around after D-Day and he's told how it went.
Cross, you missed so much. I did 3 sorties, but I couldn't see anything for the first 2. And then the clouds parted. And you've never seen anything like it. Hundreds of ships, thousands of men. And for the 3rd time that day, we hit bridges, rail yards, communication centers. So the Germans weren't able to bring up any reinforcements. And the best part? There wasn't a single Luftwaffe fighter in the air.
And the pilot, Robert Rosenthal, accurately says there were virtually no Luftwaffe aircraft at D-Day. There's I think something like 11,000 Allied planes and aircraft at D-Day. There were low hundreds of Luftwaffe aircraft. And this wonderful scene here, you see the scale of the invasion. You see bombers going overhead. You see fighters moving in small groups in between. You see ships and boats crowding the beaches. You see men and munitions and vehicles going ashore. That is a wonderful depiction of D-Day. I talked to one Australian veteran who flew a Spitfire up and down the beaches twice, once at dawn, once at sunset on D-Day. And I bet that's what he would have seen. Next up, I want to check out The Longest Day, the 1962 epic, a gigantic movie. It's one of the longest movies as well. And it's based on a wonderful non-fiction book by Cornelius Ryan that I remember reading as a young student. It's all about D-Day, and they go to great lengths to make sure that all the different contributions to D-Day are recognised. The movie depicts D-Day from all sorts of different perspectives, from the point of view of the Brits, from the point of view of the Germans, from the Americans, the French civilians, the French resistance. It's all included in that. You also get the experience of the men on the front line and also the decision makers, the people in high command. It was also quite daring in that it showed people speaking their native language, their actual language. So the Germans speak German, the French speak French, the Brits speak British, and the Americans certainly speak American. It paid off. It won 2 Oscars, I think it was, and became the highest grossing black and white film at that time.
This is Rupert.
I like this scene here because it shows a part of D-Day that's easy to forget, the importance of deception. They had to trick the Germans. They did not want the Germans to realise where they were going to land, because then they could reinforce those beaches and make it very difficult, dangerous to land. There were all sorts of different ways in which they encouraged the Germans to believe that the landings would happen largely in Calais, which is to the north of Normandy. They created a massive, entirely fake army group in southeast England to convince the Germans they were going to attack from Dover to Calais. They used double agents to feed their German handlers with all sorts of misinformation. And on the night itself, they used dummies, para-dummies, which were known as Ruperts. Some of them had sort of firecrackers on them, and they threw these Ruperts out all over swathes of northwest France to try and just confuse the Germans, to leave them guessing where the actual landings were going to take place, and to divert their forces. So there they are, dropping their Ruperts.
My Rupert, do your duty for God, King, and your country.
You can see the canopies look like real paratroopers are coming down. You've got the firecrackers going off. It's easy to see why they were so successful, actually, in decoying the Germans, and they did. There are accounts during the night of German units charging off in completely the wrong direction, so it worked beautifully, alongside all the other deception campaigns that took place. So German High Command, through the night, through the early hours of June the 6th, they're getting reports from a great swathe of northwest France talking about parachute landings. It's impossible to know which ones were real, which ones weren't. It was very distracting.
Well, you're as ready as we can make you. This 5-cent toy, it wasn't issued to you for laughs. It may save your life.
Now, this is a really interesting scene. You see the real airborne, the real paratroopers here. At this point, they're being briefed about a very simple piece of kit that they're going to be issued with. It's like a kid's toy. It's like a piece of metal that just gives a click. It's a little clicker.
1 click is to be answered by 2 clicks.
You can still buy them today. My kids drive me crazy with them. And they help you identify yourself to anyone else you meet on the ground. They're going to be landing on the ground. They'll have jumped out of an aircraft. They're going to be a bit dazed. They're going to be bewildered. There could be enemy fire. You're going to be spread out across the French countryside, and hedges and streams and woodland. And with the clicker, you can identify who is a fellow American paratrooper. And so these were really important. Rather than shouting out and identifying your position and bringing down enemy fire on yourself, you would just click. And if you received a click in return, you knew there was a friendly paratrooper there. You could meet up with them and start to carry out your mission together. And you can see here now this paratrooper's on the ground. He's clicking. He clicks once, 2 clicks back, big smile on his face. He knows he's found a friend.
2 clicks. 2 clicks.
On this occasion, as you can see, he gets it wrong, because the sound of the German operating that bolt is the same as a clicker. Now we get a depiction of one of the most famous, one of the most celebrated actions on D-Day. It's just after midnight. These will be the first boots, the first Allied boots to touch the ground on the 6th of June, on D-Day itself. It's an airborne assault. These are airborne troops, soldiers and engineers carried in gliders. So not parachuting, but carried in gliders that, as you can see, are being towed. They're being towed by those bombers. That cable will be cut at one point and they will glide in to land, hopefully, right next to key bridges over the Caen Canal and the River Orne, which link the city of Caen with the sea. Now, that canal and river system will be the eastern flank of Allied landings at D-Day. You need to make sure that you've seized any bridges over those rivers and canals, because otherwise the Germans could use them. So by seizing those bridges, you're securing your flank. And this unit of the Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry are heading in on those gliders to do just that. Here you can see the gliders crossing the French coast, and then the bombers release the cable and the gliders are flying themselves. And this is one of the most outstanding acts of piloting at any point of the Second World War. The Ox and Bucks Light Infantry trained and trained and trained till the men were sick of it. Their commander, Major John Howard, really drove them hard. He wanted everyone to know exactly the layout of the terrain they were trying to seize, the layout of the bridges, the German defensive positions, so that when they landed, it'd just be like muscle memory. They would be doing it almost on remote control. And the result was an enormous success. You see the glider coming in to land there. You see the bridge actually through the cockpit windows. They land just a couple of meters away from their targets. It's one of the most textbook bit of airborne operation history. You don't give the German defenders any time to prepare because you land right on top of them. When within seconds, the airborne troops were on the bridge, Bénouville Bridge, which was codenamed Pegasus Bridge for this mission, and they've managed to drive back the German defenders. The first Allied soldier killed on D-Day, Den Brotheridge, is killed on that bridge minutes after midnight on June the 6th, 1944. You can see them removing the charges. They didn't want the Germans to blow up that bridge, so they removed the charges from the bridge as quickly as they can, so the Allied troops are able to use it. The movie does a really good job. You can still go to that cafe on the far side of the bridge, and the owner of that cafe was actually feeding intelligence back to the British to make sure that attack went as well as it did.
Sir, all the demolition charges have been removed. It's all clear.
Good. Corporal Smith, send out the success code words. Keep sending until acknowledged.
Sir.
Hier. Britische Fallschirmtruppen. Hier. Die Invasion. Here.
So this is an interesting scene. Suddenly you're away from the front line, the mud and the grit of the battlefield, and you're in a beautiful French chateau. This is where the German headquarters would have been, various chateaux dotted around northern France. And you see them wrestling with exactly what is going on here. Is this the invasion? Is this a diversion? Is it a raid? You see this German general saying, we believe the attack is coming at the Pas de Calais, that's up in Calais, further to the north, where the English Channel is narrowest. It makes sense the attack would come across the Channel there. There's only 22, 25 miles of sea there, but instead they attack in Normandy.
Deshalb wünsche ich, dass die Panzerreserven sofort herangeführt werden.
Wir dürfen die Panzer nur mit ausdrücklicher Genehmigung.
Now this gets us to the nub. This is one of the big moments of D-Day. Hitler had demanded that only he was able to release the reserves. He had to give specific permission for these elite German armoured units, particularly these Panzer units, to move towards any Allied landings.
Eine Invasion in der Normandie wäre gegen alle Gesetze militärischer Logik. Wäre gegen alle Logik überhaupt.
He says to himself, an invasion of Normandy would be against all military logic. It's further from Paris, it's further from Britain and the supply depots in Britain, but that's exactly why the Allies decided to go to Normandy. There's an old saying in amphibious warfare, always go where your enemy aren't. And although there were German defences in Normandy, they weren't as extensive as the defences elsewhere on the French coast. And so the Allies, even though it was much harder logistically, much more challenging, they went to Normandy because they stood a greater chance of success, and they tricked the Germans.
Aber ich kann doch nicht wegen dieser wirren, sich völlig widersprechenden Meldungen den Führer wecken. War bis 4 Uhr auf, dann hat ein Schlafmittel genommen und sich zurückgezogen.
General Jodl, one of the most senior figures in the German High Command, he says the Führer's taken a sedative. We now know, years later, that Adolf Hitler was heavily dependent on drugs to sleep, to get up. And so his personal habits were now having a major impact on the course of the war, because he'd gone to bed very late, he'd taken a sedative, and everyone was too scared to wake him up.
Nun sagen Sie mal selber, ist das ein ausreichender Grund, unsere Panzerreserven an die Küste zu schicken?
They were very nervous. This was a raid, it was a diversionary attack. If they sent the panzers to the coast, then perhaps the Allies would land somewhere else. They should have immediately realised this was the main assault. The Allies were never going to launch something on this scale as a diversion.
Weigert sich, die Panzerreserve ohne Genehmigung des Führers freizugeben. Setz dich, Kurt.
And these are senior officers much closer to the front line in France itself, who know that they cannot counterattack until the Führer's woken up.
Eben einen geschichtlichen Augenblick. Wir werden den Krieg verlieren, weil unser glorreicher Führer eine Schlaftablette genommen hat.
He says we're going to lose the war because the Führer's taken a sleeping pill. I think that slightly exaggerates it, but it certainly didn't help the German response that their high command was so immobilised in these key hours. Admittedly, when the panzers did get rolling, when the German armour did get rolling, they were then smashed by Allied aviation. So the Führer being asleep wasn't the only problem that the Germans faced at this point.
Der Führer darf nicht geweckt werden. Jetzt möchte ich wirklich wissen, auf welcher Seite der liebe Gott steht.
I enjoyed this scene here. We're on the beach. The landings had enjoyed some success. There's armour, there are troops moving up, trying to get inland, and they're using carrier pigeons here. They're using messenger pigeons, which is fun.
Going the wrong way. Not towards the Germans, you idiots! The other way! The other way! Damn traitors!
They call them traitors, they're flying the wrong way. But it is a really important reminder of how difficult it was to communicate on D-Day, or indeed at any battle in this period. But D-Day in particular, a lot of the radio sets were damaged by salt water on their way to the shore. It was just, radio itself was in its infancy, so communication was hard. And there were various ways that the troops on shore were trying to use to communicate with troops further out to sea, or with naval ships that were firing gunfire in support, for example. They were flashing lights, they were using wireless radio sets, they were sending pigeons. Nowadays, we assume that everyone could talk to everyone all the time, it's all very networked, but back then, it was very, very difficult to communicate. We see a really important and celebrated part of the D-Day story here. We see the assault on Pointe du Hoc. It was carried out by the 2nd Ranger Battalion. They were taken there in British landing craft, and their job was to scale these really steep cliffs, precipitous cliffs, and capture big German guns, which they thought were on top, which were capable of firing right the way along the coast and bring Omaha, for example, under fire. So they thought that they had to scale these cliffs, they had to take this position. You see from this realistic portrayal of the landscape, we're talking real cliffs here. And they used grappling hooks fired from rocket launchers, and they also borrowed or took 100-foot long ladders from the London Fire Brigade to get up these cliffs. And it was an astonishing operation from a particularly elite unit. These Rangers managed to make it up, they scaled the cliffs. Now when they got to the top, they discovered that the big German artillery, the big guns had actually been moved.
It's empty. The Air Force and Navy really plastered this baby. Yeah, but I don't get the guns. There ain't no mounts. They never even been installed.
You can see them now moving into these bunkers where the big guns were supposed to be. They had been moved. It was thought they were just too vulnerable, I think, on that headland, so they were moved further inland, but the Rangers persisted, moved inland, and did important work that day.
First thing we gotta do is blow holes through that wire with the Bangalores.
Now I've got Omaha Beach. You see American troops struggling here at Omaha Beach, the bloodiest of the D-Day beaches. Really importantly, they bring forward the Bangalore torpedo. This was such an important weapon on D-Day. It was an explosive device that detonated along the length of this tube, and it meant that you could clear barbed wire. And you see them here kind of using the landscape, using folds in the ground, finding dead ground, pushing forward off the beach, using Bangalores to break into German defences. and then undermining German bunkers, using explosives, blowing up strong points, doing anything they can to try and get their way off that beach. For me, the big lesson from The Longest Day is that filmmakers want to emphasise the collaboration that was required on D-Day. Now bear in mind, this movie is made less than 20 years after D-Day takes place. That is less time than between us and 9/11. So there would have been people in the audience, there would have been people involved in the production process who knew a lot about D-Day, who'd experienced D-Day. And as a result, they wanted to emphasise that this was a job in which lots and lots of different people doing lots of different tasks worked together and overcame the massive, massive challenge of landing in Northwest Europe. You see paratroopers, you see planners, you see infantrymen, you see people in communications, you see people storming the beaches. And it's all of those small little pictures that combined give us the giant dramatic image of what happened on D-Day. I think these films all do a really good job at portraying the terrible reality of D-Day, the violence, the terror, and the death. I think they also do a very good job at showing off the massive amount of preparation that went into it all, and the various different contributions from all sorts of different people. We've seen a huge number of different individuals, all seemingly acting within little bubbles, playing individual roles, probably not even aware of the overall scale of the day, what was going on. And yet each and every one of them was crucial to D-Day's success. A terrifying part of Band of Brothers, Longest Day, Masters of the Air is that a huge number of the characters, the majority of the characters are actually real people. They existed. They give a representation of what it was actually like on D-Day for the individuals whose stories they're telling. And I think that proves that oftentimes reality, the historical truth, can be just as terrifying and brutal, but also as engaging for audiences as any fiction. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and you can click on any of the videos now on the screen if you want to watch more History Hit content.